Right, I'm going to talk to you today about advertising. And I'm going to start by talking about the crisis in advertising. Because advertising is in crisis. In May of this year, Peter Field and the IPA launched the crisis in creative effectiveness, which traces the decline in creative effectiveness over the last 15 years. And this presentation offers both a diagnosis and a cure. But it also serves as a warning as to what happens when a certain way of attending to the world, a mode of thinking, becomes too dominant in society, in business, and in advertising. The last 20 years have seen dramatic changes in business, the way we work, technology, yes, but also an urge towards centralization, standardization, and specialization. And behind these urges, there are instincts that leave traces in culture, that leave traces in advertising too. Much as they did, actually, in the late Roman Empire. Go with me on this. So the late Roman Empire was a period of, was a really difficult period for Rome. What happened was that the Roman Empire was being attacked on all sides, and every sort of few months it seemed that a new emperor was being replaced and usurped. And what happened in this period was that the Emperor Diocletian came to power. And Emperor Diocletian set up a symmetrical power base in the east and the west, and he put a Caesar by each of their sides. And he started to regiment society, and he categorized people into roles, into fixed roles, which they couldn't really escape by law. Not only this, but he introduced perhaps the first ever rate card. He fixed prices across the whole of Europe. These changes would lead to remarkable effects in culture, not only in sculpture, but in architecture, in the busts that I'm about to show you. So here is a bust of Decius from the period immediately before Emperor Diocletian. I'd like you to look for a moment at this man. He could live today. Look at the way he's captured in movement as he looks up towards the sky. It invites the question, what was he thinking? Look at the furrows in his brow, the scar on his cheek, the stubble on his chin, the folds in his tunic. They're extremely lifelike. And after Diocletian came to power, just within a few generations, busts start to look like this. Flattened, expressionless, devitalized, more like a death mask than an evocation of the living. Not only that, but there are changes in architecture in this period. Much like today, there was a focus on the internal space, large expanses of wall, on light coming into buildings. And you see changes in sort of friezes, architectural friezes. So we move from these spiral tendrils here that depict nature as it sort of is, with depth, a bit of asymmetry, and a sense of flow, towards this flattened, devitalized, symmetrical, and an emphasis on signs and symbols, the vine and the crosses. We go from mosaics of people who are talking to each other in dialogue, with depth, with light and shade, towards unilateral mosaics, communicating me at you. Signs and symbols emerging, a sense of flatness. We go from organic compositions of people caught in a moment, touching each other, looking at each other, towards flattened and devitalized depictions of people with no sense of connection, no sense of betweenness, a sense of repetition. But surely this couldn't happen today, could it? Well, it is. It is happening today. There's a sense of flatness, of abstraction, devitalization that's emerging, not just in advertising, but across all sorts of media. Why is this happening? Well, it's all to do with the way the brain works. So it's long been held that the left brain and the right brain do different things. In fact, it's become a popular narrative and actually not very helpful in the understanding of brain lateralization. It's hindered serious study among neuroscientists for many years. But thankfully, we have Ian McGilchrist, who is a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, really, who's been looking at how the brain works over the last 30 years or so. And what he's shown is that there are actually differences in the way that the two halves of the brain work. Differences not only in their structure, but in the way that they attend to the world. The left brain is tightly compartmentalized with passing of localized information within region, whereas the right brain has much greater overlap, dendritic overlap and branching. And what you find is that the right brain has more myelin, that's white matter. And the white matter helps to conduct things faster. It also means that the right and the left brain are sensitive to different hormones and to different drugs. So there are real structural differences between the two halves of the brain. But they also, McGilchrist shows, attend to the world in different ways. Not just in humans, but in mammals and in birds. Let me talk to you about birds for a moment. So in birds, the left brain, which controls the right half of the body and the right eye, constantly looks around on the floor in a very narrow and goal-orientated way to pick up grains from the ground, abstract them, and then identify and categorize them. Whereas the right brain, which controls the left half of the body and the left eye, is constantly looking around it. It's vigilant. Its attention is broad. It's making sure it doesn't become someone else's lunch. So these two complementary and conflicting ways of looking at the world, they don't exist just in birds, but they exist in mammals and people. And if we were to summarize what the left brain, how the left brain likes to attend to the world, it's that it would be narrow, goal-orientated. It would abstract things from their context. It likes to break things down into ever smaller parts. It's very explicit. It can't deal with ambiguity at all. It likes things to just describe things in terms of lies or truths. It sees things in linear cause and effect terms. It likes things that are familiar and that are repeatable. It is very literal and very factual. It is a bit self-absorbed, a bit dogmatic, and actually often has an unfounded sense of optimism. And it can't really appreciate music, but what it can do is appreciate very basic rhythm. Now, the right brain is quite different. It's broad and vigilant in its focus. It understands context. It understands things as a whole. If the left brain does tools and things, and by the way, language is the primary tool of the left brain, the right brain understands people. It understands body language, gestures, intonation, accents, and so forth. It understands implicit communication without words. It understands the whole world, in fact, as a series of connections and relationships. And because it's broad and vigilant in its attention, it is open to novelty. Novelty and contradiction. And novelty and contradiction mean that it understands metaphor and that it understands humor. It's very self-aware and questioning of the world, very aware of its time and place, whereas the left brain is rather paranoid and self-conscious. The right brain also understands, very importantly, gives us our sense of lived time, of space, and of depth in a way that the left brain simply can't. The left brain breaks things up into tiny little atomized moments. And the right brain understands music because texture and harmony and all of those things in music are the oral equivalent of visual depth. So if we ask someone, and we have scientists who have done this to people. We ask people to draw a flower and we anesthetize the left brain, so it's only the right brain that is drawing the flower. You get a picture of the whole flower with the flower head, the stem, the lovely leaf there, and the tilted head. Now you ask the same people and you freeze the other side of the brain, so you get the left brain to draw the flower, and what you get is flattened, devitalized representations of a flower, a symbol, if you like, a mental model of what a flower is. So whereas the right brain sees the world as it really is, the left brain represents the world, represents it in mental models. It's the whole brain that we really need to see everything together and for great creative mental leaps. If you wanted to see what the left brain thought the world looked like, it would look like this. Flattened, devitalized, and of course abstracted. Look at those everyday objects, and people as well there. So there are very big differences in the way that the two halves of the brain see the world. Now, the two halves of the brain are connected by something called the corpus callosum, which is peeled back here in this watercolour. And these bundle of fibres, they act as a bridge between the two brains, but actually their primary focus really is to inhibit one brain or another at any given time. And the left brain has a greater suppressive effect on the right than the right on the left. And so McGilchrist argues very convincingly that at certain times in history, the left brain gets a bit carried away with itself. And we see shifts towards left brain thinking in business, in society, and in individuals. And we're seeing one of those today, just as we saw it in the late Roman Empire. Let me continue my story, because what I'm going to do is pick out through art over the next few hundred years what happens, so you can see what left and right brain features in art look like. And this will be crucial when it comes to looking at advertising. So here is a late medieval manuscript. You can see here complete lack of proportion and lack of perspective. What you can see, however, is something that the left brain prizes, which is power and control. It likes to control and manipulate the world. And so the people aren't represented in terms of naturalistic, size, far away, small, close up, big, but actually in terms of their importance, and it mimics very closely an organogram of today. Now, what you find is something really beautiful happened in the Renaissance in Florence in the 15th century. What happened was that depth emerged for the first time. We moved from a left brain culture to a right brain culture. I'd like you to look in this painting not only at the sense of connection and betweenness in the people, but of the depth, the movement in the people behind. I'd like you to look at the way that it references other things. It references antiquity in the architecture. The shepherds on the right are actually a reference to another painting from 10 years previously by Van der Goes. You also see that the man pointing at Christ there, that's the artist himself, Ghirlandaio. So this is referencing other things. There is a sense of depth, there's a sense of flow, there is a sense of humanity to this. The Renaissance moves north, and then we get the Reformation. And the Reformation has many of the hallmarks of today. There was a drive for authenticity. There was a destruction of ornament. Characters disappeared. We also see the word becoming extremely important in this period. You'll note how where people used to stand freely in churches before, they're now regimented in pews, the way the left brain likes it. And they're also not pointing at the altar anymore, but towards the pulpit from where the word is proclaimed. You'll notice, of course, that the image here really only exists to serve the purpose of the words that are emblazoned all over it. There's no sense of a whole. It's an abstracted scene. And the big people are the important people, and the little people are the little unimportant people, yet again. But then we get the Baroque period. In the Baroque period, you get movement, you get free expression, you get sensuality, and you get a passing of the clouds here over this lovely canal with depth, and that signals that we understand our time and place in the world. Not only that, but in this period, music becomes more interesting. You get high and low, soft and loud, hard and soft. All of these different contrasts that come out in music, the music of Bach, where you see the whole, but also the individual voices. This was a period of sensuality, and saw the great palaces of Europe being built. This is a period of awe. And then, of course, we move towards the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment sought to throw light on everything and show clarity and explicitness, if you like. We see manufacturing, replication in this period. And we also see the effects of that on society. And we see here, in this wonderful painting from the French Revolution, just how it felt to be around at the time of the Terror. Look at the left brain features here. We have abstraction in the spolia, the bits of building that are dotted around the place. There's no real sense of a whole. We've got symbols, the Tree of Liberty. We've got symbols of the red cap and the pickaxes of the revolution. We've got symbols in the flags. And most tellingly of all, the all-seeing eye of truth. And you get this in schizophrenic patients who have psychotic episodes, you ask them to draw what they're seeing, and they draw a single eye watching them, because schizophrenic patients have left brain dominance, and they can't, they get a sense of paranoia, because the right brain is what feeds it its information. So we move from this to the Romantic period. In the Romantic period, and again, something wonderful happens. You get a sense of depth, you get a sense of ambiguity, visual ambiguity. You see many, many paintings and music at this time referencing the nighttime, dreams, dusk, dawn. You get a sense of connection. Look at the two women in the foreground here, one with the woman, arm around the other woman, so a sense of betweenness. Looking out at the men, looking out at the ships, sense of depth. Whereas the left brain does wanting and desire, the right brain does longing and yearning, interested in people. And then we get increasing mechanization, we get flatness, we get self-consciousness, we get abstraction. And art, high art, becomes increasingly abstract, as does music in the 40s and the 50s. And you get to a point where Schoenberg says how the music sounds is hardly the point. So an increasing conceptualization where ideas about the thing become more important than the thing itself. And that is the period that we are in today. But before we get there, there was a wonderful flowering, a creative revolution in the 60s, a period that would last for about 40 years. And what I want to show you now is an ad from this period, an ad from the mid-1980s. And I'd like you to look for all of those right brain features that we've talked about. A sense of place, a sense of connection between the characters, or betweenness. I'd like you to look for the way that they play with language rather than use it as a tool. I'd like you to listen out for the accents. I'd like you to look at the metaphor, and I'd like you to look at the way that it references something else, just as in the Renaissance. Here we go.
The water in Mallorca doesn't taste like what it ought to.
No. The water in Majorca don't taste like what it ought to.
The water in Mallorca doesn't taste quite how it should.
Majorca.
Mallorca?
Majorca.
Mallorca?
Hi, Dale, any danger of some refreshment in here?
Here you are. Get your laughing gear in there.
Oh, golly. The water in Majorca
What's that?
don't taste like what it oughta. Gosh. The water in Majorca don't taste like what it oughta.
She's cracked it. She's only cracked it.
You're absolutely wrong.
Heineken refreshes the parts what other beers cannot reach.
Very right-brained experience. Now I'm going to show you an ad from last year, and I'd like you to look out for some left brain features. So you will notice abstraction, you'll notice flatness, you'll notice devitalization, you'll notice highly rhythmic soundtrack, you'll notice a sense of self-consciousness and a slight sense of menace. Okay, are you ready for this?
Look, everybody wanna go and talk that. At the same time, gotta walk that. Better yet, run, go, hit a lick, divvy up with my homies, and we do it all again. They just wanna find a way out, find a way to put a little food up in their mouth. I could get a verse and then go about my business. You ain't even see it coming, can I get a witness? When I go to sleep, I only dream about my other dreams. If you want it, gotta get it, gotta live it, no condition.
You can spot all of those features, I hope. It's not just those ads. I could have picked many other ads. Here are some more examples on the left, just to look at the sorts of features that we see. Abstraction, so bits of the body, the mouth, the hands, the flatness. We don't know where it's set. We see symbols, we see words. We see things move coming in from the right visual plane, the preferred visual plane of the left brain. We see things. We see, it's almost like futurism, a sort of sense of menace in the air as well. Compare and contrast that with the depth and betweenness of advertising from around 20 years ago. 20 or 30 years ago in some cases. You'll see here a scene unfolding. You will see depth in the field of view. You'll see characters interacting with each other, a sense of betweenness that has been lost. You will see things set in the past. The right brain is quite nostalgic. The left brain likes to focus on the future or the present. So you see these changes in advertising style in this period. So here are some features of the left brain, things that we might look out for if we were going to do this properly and have a proper look at whether there has been a real change or not. Flatness, abstraction, abstracted body parts or bits of product, words obtruding on an ad, voiceover or monologue. These are examples of unilateral communication, me at you, telling you what to think. Adjectives used as nouns. The left brain loves things. So we see lots of nounification. Freeze frame effects. We see audio repetition, perhaps. Let's have a look and see. Highly rhythmic soundtracks. These are the sorts of things you might expect to find in if the advertising world had become left brain. Now, the right brain features might have a clear sense of place, one scene unfolding with progression, characters with agency, voice or movement or expression, implicit and unspoken communication, dialogue, distinctive accents, a play on words, rather than just using them as a tool. Set in the past, perhaps, reference to other cultural works, so pastiche or parody, music with melody. So what we've done is, coded up a number of ads. So I've gone back, reconstructed Coronation Street ad breaks going back 30 years. We've looked at nearly 700 ads in this period for these features. I trained someone up to do this, and she had no knowledge of the era in which the date of these ads. So what do we find? Well, we find a marked change. Something remarkable happened in 2006. In fact, depth and flatness, all of these things, depth disappeared as quickly as it appeared in the Renaissance in 1425. In 2006 is when it all starts to disappear. Left brain features start to dominate, and right brain features are disappearing. If you just want to see a few details, implicit communications disappear, distinctive accents, play on words, a scene unfolding with progression, music, cultural references, most worryingly perhaps of all. And of course, this explains why fluent devices, as I describe them, characters, and of course, scenarios have disappeared in the same period. In their place, we have rhythmic soundtracks, monologues, voiceovers, words obtruding on the ads, adjectives as nouns, and flatness. Marked changes in advertising style. I've looked at, on a separate analysis, I've taken 100 ads at random from our advertising database. We test every ad on television in a number of sectors in both these markets. And I've looked again for evidence of this, and we find it again in the UK, but also in the US, this flatness and devitalization. And it's even more marked on YouTube advertising that appears on YouTube too. Now, if all this were just a matter of taste, who's to say what's right or wrong in matters of taste? But actually, this has a real bearing on both how people relate to the ads and, of course, their effectiveness. We at System1, we measure emotional response to advertising, and we use it to turn it into a sort of star rating that amplifies share of voice or attenuates it to help predict share gain. So I presented this last year at the conference, but just to recap briefly, this is the cereals category. When you apply a basic excess share of voice model to look at the likely share gain of these 12 brands in the period subsequent, you see that excess share of voice does, to a certain extent, predict share of market gain in the following year. And what happens is that when you incorporate an emotional response to each of the ads for each of those brands, you're much better able to understand and explain market share gain in the following period, as you can see here on the right. So what do we find when we overlay these sort of two analyses? We see that left brain features, ads that feature high proportions of left brain features, are inversely correlated with emotional response and then likelihood to drive share gain. Ads that have right brain features, on the other hand, are much more likely to drive an emotional response and therefore long-term share gain. Depth, humanity, we need to entertain for commercial gain. So let's just arrange those features from most effective down to least effective on this chart. The right brain features at the top, the left brain features at the bottom, of course. And then what's happening if we overlay the likely, the sort of prevalence of these features over the years? We find that the right brain features are those features that are becoming less common, and those effective or ineffective or less effective left brain features are the ones that are becoming more common in this period. This helps to explain the crisis in creativity. This mental shift helps to explain the rise of short-termism and the decline in advertising effectiveness. Bill Bernbach said, "All of us who professionally use the mass media are shapers of society. We can vulgarize that society, we can brutalize it, or we can help lift it to a higher level." And that's precisely what he and his agency did, of course. And if you'd like to learn how this has happened and what we might be able to do about it, then why not read this book? Because as Adrian Holmes, former D&AD president and chair of Lowe, kindly writes on the front cover, if the advertising brain has stopped working properly, maybe this is the repair manual. Thank you very much.